The night swallowed her screams. The guards dragged her back to her father's compound, locking her behind the wooden doors of her mother's quarters. The walls felt like a cage, closing in, suffocating her. Outside, the village was awake with whispers. The noble daughter of Balogun had been caught with a commoner. Aderemi had brought shame upon her family. By dawn, the elders would decide her fate. But she already knew what awaited her. A forced marriage, a life beside Adegboyega, a future where she would be a wife, a mother, but never herself. And Damilare, she didn't want to think about what they would do to him. Exile would be merciful, death was more likely. Aderemi wiped her tears and steadied her breath. She could not let this be the end. She had one night to change her fate. The guards dragged Damilare through the village, his hands bound, his face bloodied but unbowed. They took him to the village square, tying him to the sacred Iroko tree, a place where thieves and traitors were judged. By sunrise, the elders would decide his punishment. Adegboyega stood before him, arms crossed, satisfaction in his smirk. "Did you think you could take what is mine and live unpunished?" Damilare spat blood to the ground. "She is not yours." A slap cracked across his face, but he did not look away. Adegboyega's voice was low, dangerous. "By tomorrow, she will be." Damilare's heart pounded, not in fear, but in defiance. He had left Aremo once before. He could live again, but not without Aderemi. Somewhere in the shadows, someone watched. Not all in Aremo agreed with the elders, and not all had forgotten the sculptor's kindness. Help would come. Aderemi's mother entered the room before dawn, her face lined with sorrow. She held out a bundle of cloth. "Change into this," she whispered. Aderemi hesitated. "You would help me." Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was once young too, my child." Aderemi's breath caught. For the first time she saw it, the weight her mother carried, the dream she had once abandoned. "Go," her mother urged, "before it is too late." Wrapped in a commoner's wrapper, Aderemi slipped into the night. She knew where they would hold Damilare. She knew she had one chance, and she would not fail. The moon hung low over Aremo as Aderemi slipped past the sleeping guards, a heart racing in her chest. The air was thick with tension, but there was no turning back now. She had already defied tradition by coming this far. Now she had to take the final step. She moved like a shadow, quiet and swift, her breath barely a whisper as she approached the village square. The sacred Iroko tree loomed in the distance, its gnarled branches stretching toward the heavens as if it could see all that happened beneath it. Damilare was there, bound to the tree, his head hanging low, but his eyes, those eyes, was still burning with that same fire she had always loved. They met hers, and for a moment, the world around them ceased to exist. "Aderemi," he whispered, his voice strained but filled with relief. "You came." She rushed toward him, her hands shaking as she untied the rope that bound him. "I couldn't let them take you. We're leaving Damilare. We're going far away from here." Damilare's eyes flickered with doubt. "But what about your family? Your duty?" "Duty?" she said fiercely, pulling him to his feet. "I am done with duty. My heart belongs to you, Damilare. No tradition, no rule will keep me from you." His gaze softened, and for a moment they stood together, surrounded by the heavy silence of the night. Then, without another word, they fled into the shadows, disappearing into the forest that bordered Aremo. The forest was dense, the night air cool and fresh. They moved quickly, through thickets and underbrush, their path lit only by the pale light of the moon. But they couldn't outrun the village forever. Aderemi knew that once the sun rose, the entire village would be searching for them. The guards would spread out, and the elders would demand their capture. They couldn't go back. "We need to get to the river," Damilare said, his voice urgent. "It's the fastest way to leave the village unnoticed. We can cross to the other side and take the path to the next village." Aderemi nodded, her pulse quickening. The river was their only chance. By the time they reached the riverbank, the first light of dawn was beginning to break across the sky. The river stretched wide and deep, its waters rushing swiftly over rocks and stones. "We'll need to swim," Damilare said, glancing at her, his expression resolute. "The current is strong, but it's our only way across." Aderemi hesitated. She had never swum this far, but the sight of the river was a promise of freedom. "I trust you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. With a shared look, they waded into the water. The coldness of it hit her like a shock, but they pushed forward, their hands gripping each other's as they fought against the current. The river was wild, and the journey was not easy, but together they made it to the other side, breathless and soaked. They collapsed onto the river bank, laughing through the exhaustion, feeling the weight of Aremo's traditions fall away. They had crossed the river, but more than that, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They walked through the day, following the hidden trails that led away from Aremo. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but neither of them looked back. By the time night fell again, they had reached a small village on the outskirts of the kingdom. It was peaceful, quiet, and far enough away from Aremo that they could catch their breath. Damilare turned to her, his eyes full of admiration. "We did it." Aderemi smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We did." They found a small house on the edge of the village, a humble home, but it was theirs. It was a place where no one would tell them who they were supposed to be. A place where they could live, not as Aderemi of the Balogun family and Damilare the sculptor, but simply as two people who had chosen each other. They would build a life here, together. And though the road ahead would be hard, they knew they would face it side by side, as equals, free from the tradition that had once tried to tear them apart. Back in Aremo, the village was in an uproar. The elders had called a meeting and every family was on edge. Whispers of betrayal, of scandal ran through the streets, but the search for Aderemi and Damilare had turned up nothing. Chief Balogun stood before the elders, his face pale with rage. "They have betrayed us. They have broken the law of our ancestors." But one elder, an old woman with silver hair, stepped forward. "Perhaps the law has been broken, but maybe it was a law that needed breaking." The village fell silent as she spoke. "Aderemi and Damilare were not wrong," the elder continued. "They chose love. And love, in the end, is the greatest tradition of all." Chief Balogun said nothing, his fury tempered by a deep, unspoken sadness. The world was changing.